Colossus by caimssword. Clank, 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 clank. Heavy footsteps clanked along the way of the tunnels, accentuated by the ambient noise of the underground. Nothing except the rumbling of the steam machinery outside of the tunnel could be heard, the footsteps proceeding slowly, yet rhythmically. A sigh came from the beholder as they approached a tightly sealed door, boots impatiently tapping the ground as she stood in front of it. Lifting up a small hatch to the right of the entrance, they removed their right glove. As they touched their index finger to the panel, the tip split off into 4. Each corner of the finger tapped into the wall, and the door slid open. A plume of steam enveloped the person's lower half as they quietly slipped their glove back on, a resigned expression plastered upon their face. Shoving their hands back into their coat pockets, she entered. The mechanical heart of the lab tremored, as was familiar to the teal-eyed person. It was almost a slight comfort to her when she returned to the laboratory. Strange, wasn't it? To find comfort in the inanimate patterns of a machine. She spun the thought around in the back of her head as she navigated the workshop of the lab. It was like second nature to them, due to how often she came and went from the place. Pressing her hand to the door again, she noted the strange quiet from up ahead. Usually, there was some sort of hustle and bustle to greet their return. The second door slid open as well, the mechanical tools of the prior room being replaced by a strangely green chamber. As opposed to the powerful machinery and disconcerting tools of the entryway, this room was filled to the brim with plants. All along the wall were, quite literally, snaking shelves holding plants upon them. As she eyed one of them, the shelf hissed at her, reminding her of the strange choices in architecture the scientist made. Continuing deeper in, the overgrowth of plants was nearly overbearing, with vines growing along the lab floor, with all manners of flowers dotting among them. They navigated and managed along the overgrowth well, already quite used to the condensed nature of the underground laboratory. Though used to the density of the scientist's quarters, the teal-eyed person thought to themselves about why it was so dense. Aside from vanity, what would she need all these plants for? She slowly realized they had already answered their own question: vanity. Rolling their eyes as they approached the final door, they instinctively went to place their hand on the panel, quickly catching that the door was already open. Strange. She stepped over a final vine, ducking underneath the shorter doorway. As she entered, she felt the familiar off-putting vibe of this room, helped in part by the now mechanical vines snaking along the wall. The room was filled with the sound of clicking, metal tapping against metal. The vines had tips akin to a fine fountain pen, being used to press against buttons, pull files from various cabinets, or all other manners of actions the person couldn't quite make out. Reverie. The person snapped out of their analysis of the room, instead looking back over to the source of the vines. Surrounded by snaking metal, a lone humanoid figure could be made out amongst the mess. She donned messy purple hair, alongside a white ribbon upon her head, lightly lit by the sterile blue light of her workspace. Her clean, white lab coat reflected the blue light, creating an almost alien look to the scientist. The vines that had been scattered about the lab were connected to a part of her back, completely flush into her coat. "I take it you were successful in your mission?" The girl's voice spoke, a strange amount of innocent youth within it. She didn't look back at the teal-eyed person, rather continuing to do one thing or another at her desk. "Yes," Reverie spoke. Her voice was significantly more gruff compared to the scientist's, one of experience and strength. Her coal black hair blended into the darker part of the laboratory, flowing cleanly into the black jacket the very tall person wore. Hee, a mischievous chuckle arose from the scientist, turning around in her chair to face Reverie. Her skin was ashen, making the scientist almost look artificial compared to the lively complexion of the tall woman on the other side of the room. Her eyes were hidden behind thick lenses, and a slimy grin topped off the expression. Excellent. I expected nothing less of you, Reverie. The compliment felt two-faced to the person. I expect my apologies. I expect I won't have to be dealing with those nosy vermin anymore, she hummed, correcting herself smoothly. Reverie grimaced at the girl, at least thankful that the scientist understood her resentment of the situation, though in a mocking tone. I hope not. For their own sake. The mechanical-armed individual leaned against the back wall, closing her eyes. She really did resent this girl. Yes, for their sake. The scientist spun back to her desk, turning away from the black-haired person. I do expect things will be falling in place for me soon. I sense many changes in the coming weeks, Reverie. As the scientist trailed off, Reverie couldn't help but hope she was wrong.